There is a silent frustration that almost every student carries, even without realizing it. The feeling that learning should be faster than it is. You study, review, repeat, spend hours sitting trying to concentrate, and yet, progress seems too slow for the effort you put in. It's as if the time invested never returns in the same proportion in results. At some point, you start to notice people who learn at a different pace. People who understand complex content in a few days, who don't need to repeat the same material 10 times, who seem to advance while others are still trying to keep up. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is there something wrong with me? Is my brain slower? Or is there a different way of learning that they never taught me? The truth is that learning 10 times faster has always seemed somewhat illegal because no one explained how the brain actually learns. The traditional system trained you to accumulate hours, not to optimize mental processes. It taught you to consume information, not to transform it into knowledge. And this creates an invisible delay that most people accept as normal. The brain does not learn better with more time. It learns better with the right kind of effort, applied at the right time. When that effort is misaligned, more hours only mean more fatigue. When it is aligned, a few minutes can generate more understanding than an entire afternoon of passive study. That's why learning quickly seems like cheating. Because those who master the right principles are not competing in the same game. They are playing a different game. A game where focus is worth more than willpower, where strategy is worth more than sacrifice, and where mental clarity speeds everything up. Throughout this video, you will understand why most people learn slowly even when they put in a lot of effort. You will discover which habits are sabotaging your speed without you realizing it and what the central principle is that allows you to learn at a speed that seems absurd to those who still rely on the traditional method. If this topic already makes sense to you, take the opportunity now to subscribe to the channel. This type of content is made for those who want to learn more intelligently, with applied science and real cognitive advantage. Learning quickly is not illegal. What has always been unfair is that they never showed you how to speed up the process. And it all starts with understanding what is really blocking your learning. To understand why learning seems so slow, one must look at the context in which most people were trained to study. From an early age, learning was associated with long periods of sitting, constant repetition, and continuous effort. The more exhausted you were, the greater the sense of accomplishment. The problem is that the brain never worked well under this model. The human brain does not measure learning in hours, it measures it in processing quality. Attention is a limited and costly resource. When you try to study for a long time in a row, your mind goes into survival mode. It continues to look at the information, but stops processing it in depth. The result is familiarity without understanding and effort without retention. Another overlooked factor is the illusion of learning. Reading, highlighting, and reviewing create the illusion of progress, but rarely strengthen memory. The brain recognizes the information, but it doesn't learn to access it on its own. When the moment comes to use the content, everything disappears. Added to that, the modern environment destroys focus. Notifications, multiple tabs, constant stimuli. Each distraction breaks the mental state necessary to learn quickly. The brain spends more energy trying to concentrate than actually learning. Before speeding up, it is necessary to acknowledge this. The problem is not a lack of effort. It's a system that slows down the mind without you realizing it. Real change happens when you understand a simple but counterintuitive principle. The brain does not learn better when information comes in easily. It learns better when it has to work to retrieve that information. Whenever something is too easy, too comfortable, the brain interprets it as disposable. He understands that he can access it later and sees no reason to store it deeply. That's why traditional methods fail. They are based on passive consumption. Read, watch, review. All of this keeps the mind in a comfortable state. It seems productive, but it doesn't create strong memory. Quick learning begins when you force the brain to produce answers instead of just recognizing content. This right effort activates more stable neural circuits. Even making mistakes is part of the process. When you try to remember and fail, the brain receives a clear signal that the information matters. It adjusts itself. He reorganizes himself. He learns. Another central point is the rhythm. The brain learns better in short and intense blocks, not in long and exhaustive sessions. After a certain amount of time, the quality of processing declines. Insisting beyond that does not accelerate learning, it only increases fatigue. When you combine active cognitive effort with clear time limits, something changes completely. Studying stops being burdensome and becomes strategic. You stop measuring progress in hours and start measuring it in real understanding. This is the principle that makes learning quickly seem illegal. It's not rare talent. It's alignment between method and brain. And in the next step, we will transform this principle into a practical mechanism that you can apply immediately. The first practical mechanism that transforms this principle into real results is simple but powerful. It completely changes the way you interact with information. Instead of consuming content for long periods, you start using study as an active mental workout. The technical name for this is active recall, but the concept is straightforward. You study to remember, not to recognize. In practice, this means stopping the constant reliance on open materials. After studying a concept for a few minutes, you close everything and try to explain what you learned in your own words. It can be speaking, writing, or even thinking in a structured way. The important thing is to force the brain to access the information without external help. This effort creates a clear signal for the brain. He understands that this information is important, that it will be used again. And that's why he starts to strengthen it. Unlike rereading, which keeps everything comfortable, the attempt to remember generates the right kind of difficulty. A difficulty that accelerates learning. At first, this may seem more tiring. And that's exactly why it works. You study for less time, but with much more mental intensity. Each block generates real learning, not just a sense of progress. This is where many start to feel like they are cheating. Because in just a few minutes, you progress more than you would in hours of passive study. In the next step, we will show how to expand this method without increasing study time. When you start applying active recall consistently, something changes in your relationship with studying. You realize that learning doesn't have to be burdensome or endless. But this is where many people make a subtle mistake. Tries to speed up by adding more content, more subjects, more information. And that freezes everything again. The brain doesn't learn well in volume. It learns in clarity. The more things you try to learn at the same time, the greater the interference between them. Concepts get mixed up, details get lost, and the feeling of confusion increases. Learning quickly requires reducing, not accumulating. One concept at a time. One central idea per session. Only move forward when it truly makes sense. This focus creates something powerful. Visible progress. Each small understanding generates a sense of control that most people have never felt while studying. And this feeling is not just psychological. It comes accompanied by dopamine, the neurotransmitter of progress. That's how the brain starts to enjoy the process. Maybe you have experienced this at some rare moment when studying felt easy and fluid. It wasn't luck. It was method, even if unconscious. Now imagine turning this into a standard. If at any point you have felt that studying could be simpler than it seems, comment down below. I want to know if this difficulty is something you experience today or if you have already started to change the way you learn. In the next step, we will talk about the exact point where most people sabotage everything, even when using good methods. There is a critical point where almost everyone sabotages their own learning, even when using the correct methods. This point arises when the mind starts to tire and the person decides to persist. The logic seems good. I'm already here, so I'll study a bit more. But, cognitively, this is the worst time to continue. The brain learns better when it is in a controlled state of alertness. Neither too relaxed nor exhausted. When this state is lost, the quality of processing quickly declines. You keep looking at the content, but the brain is no longer creating strong connections. He is just trying to survive the effort. Those who learn quickly understand something counterintuitive. Stopping at the right moment accelerates more than insisting. Ending a session while there is still energy creates unresolved cognitive tension. A small feeling of incompleteness. And this is powerful because it makes the brain continue working in the background, organizing and consolidating information even outside of study time. But when you push yourself to exhaustion, everything gets mixed up. Learning loses clarity and the mind associates study with exhaustion. Over time, this creates internal resistance, procrastination, and demotivation. This shift changes everything. Studying becomes a strategic act, not a test of endurance. Less time, more precision. Less brute force, more applied intelligence. There are some silent mistakes that keep people stuck in slow learning, even when they already know good methods. The first of these is confusing effort with effectiveness. Many people believe that if they are tired, then they are learning. But mental fatigue is not proof of progress. Often, it's just a sign that the brain has been overloaded without direction. Another common mistake is relying too much on external tools. Ready-made summaries, excessive mind maps, sequential videos. All of this can help, but when it becomes a crutch, it weakens learning. The brain learns when it needs to work, not when everything is already too organized. There is also the myth of extreme discipline. The idea that studying well requires constant suffering. This creates a negative relationship with learning. Those who learn quickly don't force themselves all the time. He structures the environment so that focus happens with less resistance. Ignoring rest is another saboteur. Learning doesn't happen only during study, but also during breaks. Without a break, there is no consolidation. Without consolidation, there is no lasting memory. If any of these traps have sounded familiar to you so far, give the video a like. This helps the content reach more people who are stuck in these same mistakes without realizing it. In the next step, we will show how all of this is validated in practice and why these methods work even under pressure. When you observe those who learn quickly in high-demand environments, you realize that these principles are not theory. They are used because they work under pressure. At top universities, in intensive training, in programs where the volume of information is high and time is short, no one studies passively for hours. The focus is on performance, not the appearance of effort. Studies in cognitive psychology show that people who practice active retrieval and spacing learn more, retain for longer, and forget less. Not because they have more capacity, but because they train the brain in the right way. Learning becomes an active process, not a mere exposure to information. This also explains why self-taught individuals can master languages, programming, or complex skills in just a few months. They don't memorize everything. They test, make mistakes, correct, and move forward. The mistake ceases to be a sign of failure and becomes a mechanism for strengthening memory. Even outside of formal study, this pattern repeats itself. Everything you really know how to do well was learned through trial and application, not through passive repetition. The brain learns when it needs to act. That's why this method seems illegal. It breaks expectations. While many still measure learning in hours, those who apply these principles measure it in results. Putting all of this into practice is simpler than it seems. The mistake most people make is trying to change everything at once. Learning quickly does not require a perfect routine, it requires minimal structure and consistency. The first step is to stop thinking of studying as something continuous and start seeing it as short and intentional blocks. Each block should have a clear objective. Not studying an entire subject, but understanding a specific concept. You study this content for a few minutes, with full attention, without distractions, and then you close the material. At that moment, you try to explain what you learned without consulting anything. It can be writing, speaking out loud, or mentally organizing. This effort is what generates real learning. After that, you check, adjust, and close the block. Don't extend beyond what is necessary. A short break allows the brain to consolidate the content. Throughout the day, you can repeat this process at different times. Little time, multiple sessions. As the days go by, something becomes clear. You learn more, forget less, and feel in control of your own progress. Studying stops being a heavy obligation and becomes a strategic skill. When this method becomes a habit, time stops being the problem. You stop chasing after content and start mastering the process. In the end, learning quickly is not about hurry, nor about competing with others. It's about control. It's about understanding that the brain doesn't respond well to brute force, but to the right strategy. When you stop trying to learn the way you were taught and start learning the way the mind really works, everything changes. Studying stops being heavy, confusing, and endless. It becomes clear, direct, and efficient. You realize that you don't need to spend hours fighting against your own attention. You just need to create the right conditions for your brain to work in your favor. Over time, learning ceases to be a constant source of anxiety and becomes a silent advantage. Something that accumulates day by day, without unnecessary wear and tear. If this video helped you see learning in a different way, subscribe to the channel. Here, the focus is on teaching how to think better, learn faster, and use applied science to gain a real advantage in the modern world. Staying here means stopping wasting time and starting to develop real cognitive control. The most important thing is to remember that you are not slow. You are not incapable. You were just using methods that slow down your brain without you realizing it. Now that you understand the process, the responsibility shifts. Apply, adjust, and repeat. Because when learning stops being an obstacle, your potential finally starts to show.